Hello and welcome back to the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. Delving into longer and more sophisticated music, Don Fagen and Walter Becker experimented with various band lineups for each song on Asia to craft and perfect their jazz rock hybrid of an album, mixing their own songwriting skills with the jazzy prowess of the likes of Wayne Shorter and Tom Scott. Legitimised jazz in rock and marked a significant moment in the relationship between these two genres. Joining me to discuss this album is my co-host, Mr. Felipe Amorim. How are you doing, bro?
Doing great, man. Had my journey kind of disrupted by strikes, but I'm home at last.
There you go. Well, and what a better place to be.
Yeah, got the reference, didn't it?
Very good, very nice, very nice. Very professional as usual. But yeah, anyway, so if you didn't get it from the picture you're seeing on the podcast or the picture you're seeing on YouTube or Felipe's reference or the fact that I mentioned it in the opening paragraph, we are doing Asia by Steely Dan from 1977. So as usual, I'll just give you a few quick facts. So it was released September 23rd, 1977. Took 1 year to record between 1976 and July 1977. Recorded in studios across Los Angeles, New York, and Hollywood. Genres associated with this album, and I'm sure we'll get into this: jazz rock, yacht rock, pop rock, jazz, and white soul. The album falls just under 40 minutes in length, released on the ABC label with producer Gary Katz and the band in charge of producing the album. So let's get talking about this album.
Yeah, so why this album, right?
So I chose this album, yeah, and the reason I chose it is because this was actually probably my first ever experience of jazz fusion, and I learned this when we were at uni studying at the Institute of Music in London. This came up as one of the funk bass lines. So when I was studying bass, we had sort of lessons. We had a lesson on funk, a lesson on jazz, a lesson on rock, and this was one of the ones that came up in funk. Now the song we did was Peg. And obviously, you know, it is very funky in nature, but it's still part of this wider jazz fusion album. And I thought, what better way? You know, we haven't really done jazz or jazz fusion on this show yet, and I thought, what way to sort of get it going with this album, which was my first introduction to jazz fusion. But yeah, I mean, do you want to kick us off, bro? Anything in particular you want to start off with?
Well, the one thing I want to say is, like, because this is a rock show, why would we approach an album that is jazzy or even pop, if you want to claim it's pop music? And I think everything about it, it's rock, really. Like the fact that is the music direction of this album is completely unpredictable.
Yeah,
is the most rock and roll thing about it. Like you never know where they're going, and they've managed to make commercial music that is actually clever, like really clever. And
it's hard to do because a lot of nuances of let's call it complicated music. So your jazz fusion, your prog, all this kind of music. It's hard to connect with wider commercial audiences with that kind of music, because without sort of trying to call people who like pop music stupid, it's hard to understand the technicality behind what's happening in a prog song that goes from 7/8 to 9/16, you know. And then in jazz solos always playing the mixolydian over a double seven chord or whatever. People don't get why that's special, and not that shouldn't be expected of them. You know, we spend years of our lives learning why it's special and what makes it advanced and what makes it special to implement that into a rock song, for example. So I don't expect mainstream audiences to get jazz or prog or something.
Also, like a complicated chord or song structure doesn't necessarily make the song good. That's a misconception that some musicians have. Oh, let's make something that is extremely complex, and this is going to be great just because it's difficult to play. And it's not entirely true, you know. And it's what Steely Dan does is not really easy listening, but it can be at some point, at some moment.
That's really interesting you say that, because I mean, let's first talk. I want to do today is I want to just talk about. I got 4 or 5 categories that I want to talk about. So we can obviously get the songs in when it's appropriate, but there's just some overarching themes of the album I want to talk about. One of them is jazz fusion. So let's kind of explain what that is. Jazz fusion, I think to sum it up simply, is playing jazz music on rock instruments. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I've one definition I like, which is not it doesn't exclude your definition, is jazz mixed with anything else. So
Yeah. Okay.
when you have an Afro-Cuban groove and you're playing a jazz melody, that could be considered fusion, although people would just call it Afro-Cuban jazz.
Yeah.
But you have, since Miles Davis started experimenting around 1975, using rock instruments, as you say, like electric guitars and other stuff. But the point for me is it's not necessarily the instruments, but any other genre mixed with jazz. If you
I think that's
have
fair.
if you
Yeah.
have a funk beat, if you listen to Chameleon by Herbie Hancock, that's a funky beat.
Just quickly interrupt Felipe to tell you, as usual, if you're new to this show, the full album we're talking about and any song we mention is going to be in a Spotify playlist in the show notes below, so you can listen before or after the episode. And any songs, like Felipe said, that come out that aren't in the album, they'll be there as well. So please continue.
Yeah. So Chameleon is a funk groove, very, very, very funky. But if you isolate the melody, you can call it jazz, and in terms of interpretation as well, and also the fact that it's instrumental. Most people just call instrumental music jazz, unless it's classical music. Oh, that's jazz because it's instrumental. Anyway, but yeah, fusion for me is jazz mixed up with anything. Could be rock, could be funk, and in that sense, Steely Dan is closer to a fusion band than to a rock band. But one thing I want to say is they are not really a band in this album, because they I think they toured as a 5-piece band, the original lineup when they started.
Yeah.
And eventually they decided that touring wasn't the big deal. They wanted to be in studio recording. The band didn't tour for 19 years. So that's just producing albums. And so you have the two main songwriters, and basically what you have is guitar and piano. So everything
can we come
else
back to that?
Yeah.
Can we come back to that? Because just in this, so jazz fusion, we've got our definition. Just for listeners, because as you said, this is mainly a predominantly rock show. We are going to branch out every now and then. I said way back in the first episode, I'd like to get to the point where we do a 2-pack album one day, just because why not? Rock, rap music doesn't necessarily. It doesn't mean that rap, there can't be something rock and roll about rap music. You never know. So why not expand our horizons and try a different genre? Yeah. So jazz, what's the difference in terms of what does jazz fusion bring to rock music? You're talking about complex harmonies. So with rock songs, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a simple chord, either a G, an A minor, an E flat minor, whatever. We're going to stick to them mainly. But with jazz, I don't know why the name jazz is there, but sometimes when we use the word jazzy to describe stuff, when you say, "Oh, let's jazz that up a bit," that's because you're taking a simple
spice it up, isn't it?
Spice it up by taking a simple chord like a G minor and adding a special note. And we might, again, we're not going to go into this, but that note might be a 7th. So you hear them say a G minor 7th, or it might be an 11. And I'm not going to go into the intricacies of why we use those numbers, but it adds another little tone that just changes the chord. It's still a G minor at root, but it just decorates it a little bit with another little number. So I'll leave that there. And because of the complex harmonies and chords you're playing, you are getting more sophisticated chord progressions. And they're and you probably hear, if you've listened to Asia, you'll hear moments where actually a chord comes and you go, "Ooh, that's jazzy, that's spicy," that's unusual
and unpredictable, isn't it? Sometimes you're not expecting that tension in the chord.
Yep.
Sometimes I think they do a lot of that with the vocal melodies as well. Some of the phrases, the title song for me, you hear the beginning of the melody and that's, oh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
And then immediately goes in a direction that you're not expecting.
And you said in the title song, I can think of the chorus where it goes, "Asia, Da, 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 and it just oh, you're like,
Exactly.
oh, hold on, where's
There's
that
always
going?
a couple of notes in a melody you think like,
Yeah.
oh, I wouldn't have thought of that,
Exactly, but they did. And then with that, you're getting intricate arrangements. So this is part of the, I think this is what we call the fusion part of it, because as you said, jazz mixed with another style. That other style could be avant-garde, where we get unusual syncopated hits. Even though jazz can be syncopated in itself and quite often is, intricate arrangements, intricate melodies that, as Felipe already mentioned, you're not expecting. So yeah, that covers the jazz fusion side of it and what you can expect to hear from jazz when it inserts itself into rock. Now, let's talk about the thing that you were just about to get to, the bands.
Yeah,
I say
well,
bands, not band.
bands. There's so many session guys. The thing with them is they I think it's because they used New York session musicians and LA session guys as well. The different, well, it's interesting to mention there's kind of a rivalry between those two music scenes in terms of how they play stuff, especially how they play jazz music. So what so Walter Becker is the guitar player, isn't it? So I sometimes get confused.
Yeah.
What he mentions in an interview about the album is like the some of the LA guys, they would bring, so you hire a drummer from LA, they would come on with a truck, and there's a crew like taking the whole drum kit, and it's this gigantic kit, loads of drums and cymbals, and it's all really planned and organized, but that also reflects in the way they play. And they play something that is like predictable but extremely well executed. And they
Okay.
said, on the other hand, you have the New York guys coming with their hardware and cymbals like in the bags, and they use whatever drum kit you have at the studio. Uh, but they have a certain freedom in the way they play, and they would take more risks. And I think the album's got a good balance of both session styles. It's really interesting to mention that when you change a band from song to song, you're running a major risk of your album like not having a style that connects the songs in a way, or a sound or a
Uh,
vibe or a groove,
and I must
right?
emphasize to listeners that when you can do your own research into this because it's too much for us to note
It's
down.
2 minutes.
Each song has its own band.
Yeah.
There might, I know that Chuck Rainey plays bass on most of them, but other than that, I think there's about 5 different drummers on the album.
Yeah, I know. So it's just
Has
in
many
terms of,
different guitarists. So just to before Felipe goes on, just know that each song has a different lineup. There is not one song on the album that has the same list of musicians.
it's around 40 musicians involved in this album. It's a
Correct.
lot of
Yeah.
people, and they're all great. To the point they tried loads of guitarists. There's a documentary about the album where they're going on about, I think it's Peg. They're trying to record the guitar solo, and they hired a different guitar player every day.
Yeah.
People would come. The sound engineer was like, "Oh, here we go again, another guitar player to do the same solo, and or improvise their own solo on the song." And they were not happy. The documentary they're going on about this is kind of funny because it sounds a bit Spinal Tap. They're like, yeah, so we used 4 or 5 guitar players. No, 5 or 6, or no, six or 7. I
I
think
think it
7
was
or
more
8.
like 10.
It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, they got to get up to, if they were speaking with a British accent, it would be total Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
But the fact they were trying out and paying the best musicians in the world just to go there and do one solo or a few bars in a song to see if that fits the song or not. That shows the commitment with excellence, right? Now,
Absolutely.
one thing I want to say is that it could have resulted in a lack of unit when you have too many different people in the album, especially the rhythm section. If you have
Mhm.
different drummers and bassists, you're really running a risk there. And um some of my favorite drummers on the album, Jim Keltner, who was John Lennon's favorite drummer for studio
Oh.
records. You have Steve Gadd. You know, can't even name who he played with. Literally everyone in the music industry. And you had Bernard Purdie, who
That's
is
the one. Yeah.
oh man, Bernard Purdie. Don't get me started. So you wouldn't hire. They would hire those guys, but the thing is, they have very different styles, and I think that's my opinion here. Chuck Rainey is the guy who keeps it all together.
He's
The
the glue.
bassist, he's the glue because he's in almost every song,
Yeah.
and the bass is the soul of this album, in my opinion.
And I mean, except I'm trying to think what album it was. We did it recently. One of the recent albums, maybe it was Iron Maiden, where you asked me about the bass, and I said that for me the bass is the most important instrument. Bias, of course,
Yeah, not
because
because you're a bassist,
no,
right?
no, of course not,
Nothing to do with that.
because the bass is the marriage and the foundation between the melody and harmonies that a keyboard or a guitar or a singer plays and the rhythm that a drum or percussion plays. The bass needs to be perfect for both of those to shine and all work together. And you're absolutely right, man. Chuck Rainey, an incredible bass player. I studied him in university, of course, when I did this song. And man, what a player! What a player!
Yeah.
And his contribution to the album is so important, as you said, because it is the glue that binds these different musicians together. And it's kind of like, whilst you'd normally expect the band to fit around a drummer and go, okay, this is the drummer's style. So I, as a bass player, only playing on one song, I'm going to fit to his style. Or like you said, a guitarist coming in and saying, well, I'm only doing this solo on two songs. I'm going to, the drummer's the constant. Okay, I'll listen to him. But with Chuck Rainey and this album, it is the bass. And he does a fantastic job on it. If you watch the same documentary that I've watched, then you'll notice the part that he actually bought stuff to the album as well.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the song Peg. They asked him not to slap because slap bass.
I love that.
I know slap bass in the mid-70s was kind of it was starting to become quite prominent in bass playing, and Chuck Rainey, being a session musician, could obviously do it. And he said what did he say? He said he turned away from them, put a screen up so they couldn't see him, and he slapped the bridge of Peg.
Yeah.
And obviously it worked. It made a difference.
No, it's a great bass part, and he knew what the song needed. So that's the other thing. They were really demanding with the musicians, but some of those musicians were, I would say, cheeky enough to say, "Wait a minute, no, I know what I'm doing here." Bernard Purdie was one of them, because when they did "Home at Last," which is my favorite track in the album, because of the piano and the drums mainly. It's just such a beautiful tune. Bernard Purdie said, "Oh, this needs a halftime shuffle," and they were like, "Oh no, not shuffles. We don't want to shuffle for this song." It's a very specific kind of groove, and Bernard Purdie was like, "No, that's what this song needs. I know." So he calls himself the hit maker. And it was like, so I'm the hit maker. I know what I'm doing here. And he played the groove, and they were like, yeah, fair enough.
Of course, you know what it needs. You're Bernard Purdie.
Yeah, exactly. So they knew they were working with the best musicians in the world, and those guys would deliver what they wanted.
We've mentioned Chuck Rainey, we've mentioned Bernard Purdie, but another person was Wayne Shorter on saxophone, who played for Miles Davis.
Yes,
which is a huge credit to have to your name, and a huge name for Steely Dan to have on their album.
Yeah. Well, Wayne Shorter is one of the greatest names in jazz music. Yeah. You got to mention Weather Report as well, isn't it? So he is such a creative guy who could not only work for people, like providing the solos and the phrases they wanted, but also create his own music. And yeah, it's such a brilliant musician, really.
So I'm going to segue from this section into the next section with my final point about the multiple bands. As you mentioned, they were chasing such a particular sound for each song that they ended up, as we said, changing the lineup for each song. Now, how does this sound? The songs they wrote, and they knew the sounds, as you said from the documentary, they knew the sound that they wanted for each song. But when pieces of music came that were so technically demanding, they didn't play it themselves. They play that, Walter Becker is not on 2 tracks on the album.
Oh,
it's
wow.
Black Cow,
yeah, that's one thing I didn't know.
Black Cow and one other one. I can't remember. It might have been Asia or Peg. He's not on them because the parts that he wrote were so technically demanding. He just put his hands up. I mean, this is crazy. As an artist, we know that a lot of artists are fueled by their ego, but how confident in your own ego and how committed to the project do you have to be to say, do you know what? This requires better than what I am at the moment, so I'm going to call in this guy to play it.
Yeah, that is like, it means that the music, it's way bigger than your ego.
Yeah, and so I think that's a massive credit to them.
And it's not about like, oh, I'm a great musician, I've got to play the solo. He plays some beautiful solos in the album, but he also has other guitar players coming to play solos when they could do a better job or more creative job or different.
I just
Go on.
think that's such a credit to him and to them to actually say, do you know what? I can't do this. Let's get someone else in. And listen, this is very complex music, so it's not like he can't play the pentatonic scale. Like he's very good at what he
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
But this leads me to the next stuff I want to talk about, which is the perfectionism of the album. Because this album, and when I'm not saying it's a perfect album, that's debatable,
Hmm.
but the level of perfection they are striving to achieve. And I want to start this section off by talking. Maybe you heard this from in the documentary. Dean Parks, who was a guitarist on the album, says this: perfection is not what they went after. They were after something you wanted to listen to over and over again. So we would work past the perfection point until it became natural, until it sounded almost improvised. So it was a two-step process. Step one was to get perfection. Step two was to get beyond it and to loosen it up a bit,
Oh
which
wow.
I just find nuts when everything you and me know about music. And listen, we're far from the most knowledgeable people in music on the planet, but we know our fair share. We've experienced it. We know that you go for the groove of the song first, you go for the feel of the song, you work out your parts, you get it all together, you work with the rest of the band, then you perfect it. But not on this
Yeah.
album.
Yeah.
The guitarist is saying they went the other way. They perfected things and then wanted to unperfect it a little bit by loosening it up and not making it sound so polished.
Yeah, I think it's again a combination of the LA and the New York approach to arrangement and everything else, and and I think yeah they had definitely a lot of attention to detail. That's what it is. That's where the perfection is, in my opinion. You know, like, oh, let's try a different groove for the song. See if we change the groove slightly or the chords or whatever, if that's going to work or not. And then, as I said, when everything's perfect, just bring some chaos into
Bring
it.
some
It could be just
humanity.
yeah, it could be just a guitar solo. It could be the interesting thing about it is that Gary Katz is the producer in this
Yep.
album, isn't it? We're talking about our university. He came for a lecture once, and so I had the pleasure to see that man talking for a couple of hours about the stuff he produced, and everyone was shocked when he mentioned that he doesn't play an instrument and he doesn't do any mixing or any sound engineering things. And someone said,
Wow.
so what's your job as a producer then? Because for people who don't know, most producers nowadays, they are normally, as a general rule, they are good sound engineers. And they know their gear really well. They normally play one or more instruments. It's like,
I'd go a step further nowadays and say that when you look at people like Dr. Dre
yeah,
and rap music, which I know is
mm,
different to what we're talking about, you
yeah,
have a man or woman who can play everything on a keyboard, like
yeah,
Dr. Dre, who is quite a
yeah,
talented musician, and then you have an artist come over it. And I mean that for pop music as well, not just rap. You might have
yeah,
a producer for Taylor Swift who can play every instrument needed. He'll
yeah.
produce that, and Taylor's just got to sing.
Yeah,
But so
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, no.
back to your
So
point.
in that case, Gary Katz is the guy who says, "Oh, I trust my ears," and that's what it is. So think about it. You have two great songwriters who happen to be amazing musicians, hiring some of the best guys in the business. So everyone in the room is a master of their instrument, and then there's a guy who doesn't play, who trusts his ears, and he's if you're not a musician, you're a music fan, you're on the other side of this game. And it's really important to have that view. He would be the guy who said, no, this sounds good. No, that doesn't sound good. What if you go a
Mm.
little bit more, crazy or a little bit more, I don't know. So he would speak in not necessarily in music terms in order to get a good sound out of the musicians. And I think is maybe that's part of the chaotic element of the album. To have someone who can hear you as an outsider and give you an honest opinion, not only an opinion, but like an insight on
I
what you
think
do.
a grounded opinion, an
Grounded
opinion
opinion.
that forgets what these guys know about jazz and how it's clever to put I'm making this up, an A major 7 just after a C dominant sharp 11. You know, that technically might work. But
And
if
you
you've got
have
someone on the ground who says, doesn't quite work,
it
that
doesn't quite
grounds the
work. Try
band.
the other one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's good to have a guy like that working in a project. And yeah, and this he is someone who knows a lot about music in a different way. And it goes sometimes beyond the perfection that we're talking about. Yeah.
So continuing in that vein, for me, it's almost like each song has become a piece of art within itself, requiring uh, the same level of attention, detail, precision that some bands would give to an entire album, but just
Yeah,
per song, because they're so well crafted, aren't they?
yeah,
And it's not just cool jazz chords, great jazz solos, um, and good drumming. The production side of it as well. That is the next section I want to go on to. Is the production of it. It's. I'd go as far as saying it's flawless.
yeah,
I can't think of anything that I'd say, oh, do you know, that mix is a little like this, or it could have been produced a bit better like this. The attention to detail given to every instrument and every minute detail of the album is flawless. Unless you have anything else about perfectionism, can I go on to the production?
yeah. Let's move on.
So here's some research I did about the technical innovations that the producers did for this album. All right, overdubbing and layering, creating a much denser, intricate sound. And this means, when you talk about layering in production, it's quite simple. You are layering instruments on top of each other. Now, that's quite simple when you're doing drums, bass, guitar, and vocals. But when you have two or three guitars, and it's not unheard of, two basses,
Yeah,
two drums,
yeah.
multiple vocals, it can get hard to sort of place things where they need to be for the audiences to hear them. Um, Isolation booths. This is the mid 70s. They isolated every instrument, bro.
Wow.
Every instrument they isolated. And what this means technically is that if you're in a room and the producer says to you and your band, okay, play through the song and we'll try and capture the bass. If your bass has got a microphone on it, although you're playing your bass and that's the main signal going into the microphone, you might also get what we call a bit of bleed, which is where a certain tone of a guitar might just seep into your instrument, and it just loses quality, let's say, doesn't it? It just
Yeah.
loses the specific signal that is just the bass. And that this is quite common practice nowadays. But for the mid 70s, bro, to be isolating
Every
every
musician
instrument,
in a booth. Yeah. Well, so
every
I didn't know when that started in music, but that allows the musicians to play together and also get a quality of recording that sounds like they recorded one at a time. So that
yeah.
is the best of both worlds.
But further to this, they've actually mic'd the instruments as well. In terms of, did I read somewhere that they put um, microphones up onto their right hand of the guitar
Oh,
so
I
that you
see.
could
Which is
get
how
the
you normally
picking.
do with acoustic guitar. It's interesting to do that
Exactly.
with electric guitar. Wow, never heard of
Exactly.
that.
And so
Interesting.
you get that, and then you're basically picking up and getting the nuances of each instrument, and basically, things like just a little pick. And I think you can hear it in Peg. There's that lovely part of guitar which goes da 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 because
Oh,
the
the muted
guitar,
notes. Yeah,
yeah, because the guitar on this whole album, as melodic and harmonic as it is in places, it's very percussive in all others, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. And I think, well, interesting that you say this is it's percussive because like rhythm is for me what makes this album accessible, you know. And yeah, so in terms of all the production stuff you're talking about, I think those details are like capturing the plectrum and getting the room sound and that kind of stuff. You're bringing some life to music. Otherwise, it can end up being overproduced. If
Mm,
it's well thought in terms of arrangement, and there's that search for the perfect sound, the perfect execution, it might end up sounding too cold. Like not human
yeah.
when it's too good and too correct. Let's put it like that. So yeah, that sort of ideas really make the music more human. I love it.
Beautiful. Just to add to the technical stuff, there was some signal processing techniques that they were utilizing and innovating, dynamic range compression, EQ, which is basically enhancing the clarity of each instrument, which is what I said before. It's like, isolation booth, miking up the intricate parts of an instrument, and then sort of using these new signal processing techniques means that you're going to be able to hear each instrument crystal clear. And that is what I think this album achieves so well, just beautifully hearing all the perfectly mixed instruments. It is producing perfection.
Yeah.
Production perfection. It still sounds great today. It sounds like it could have been mixed yesterday. It's fantastic.
Yeah. It sounds as good as any modern pop album
Yeah, excellent.
in terms of sound engineering and mixing. Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to talk about?
In terms of production,
No, just in general. I've kind of come to the end of my points, themes.
So Lars is the organized one here.
Felipe,
he actually follows his notes. I write my notes and then forget about it.
I'm the LA player. You're the New York player, aren't you?
Yeah, we need both of us to do the shows.
There you go. Yeah,
no,
exactly.
I want to say about in terms of the complexity of it and how clever the songs are. I think if you only listen to one song of this album, I would say Asia is the one. I'll tell you.
That's a good point,
my opinion on that is because first of all, it's a long song. They have a few short songs. Short, I mean, like just under 4 minutes or 5 minutes. But Asia is a long song, almost 8 minutes or around 8 minutes.
7:57. Yeah.
Yeah. So that song has got everything. You can hear all of their influences in it. And it's got a sort of a bossa nova groove at the beginning. And it can get quite funky at some points. And at some points, there's no groove, just cymbals. Just like, it's just a vibe. You can't hear the groove. And they went for something that I think it wasn't... There's an interview... I know you like Rick Beato, who's one of my favorite YouTube channels. And he interviewed Steve Gadd about that song. And Steve Gadd said that at the time, no one has seen that in pop music. There's a sax solo in the song, and the drums, they solo over the sax solo. There's two of them. So that's how unpredictable it is. Yeah. So you got this beautiful melody and the lyrics, and it talks it's about a woman and how he admires that woman. And you're listening to that, and you go into that journey. Oh, it's a beautiful story, right? And then the sax solo, and you have Wayne Shorter playing the solo, one of the greatest. And he goes for that solo, and the drum starts soloing on top of it. That you can hear that in jazz or fusion or free jazz, whatever. It's kind of acceptable. In any other context, it's like, come on, drummer, shut up! Like that's the sax moment. You're like you're overplaying. You're playing over and you're actually playing over someone else's solo. Yeah. It's the most it's the most rude thing you can do as a musician. Is to take someone else's solo, but. It was designed to be like that.
I was going to say, if they wanted two solos at once,
they wanted the drum solo.
If it's on the album, that means they wanted it.
Yeah, and Steve Gadd says that they were not quite clear about what they wanted, but they would let you try to decipher what they wanted and go for it. And they gave him enough freedom to go and solo over that. And it's one of the most epic drum solos of all time. And you've got that at the end again. So when we think the song is going to calm down, and it does, and it becomes kind of pop music again. At the end, the sax and the drums start soloing together again. It's just beautiful.
I agree with you. I think it's the song to go to on the album. If you want a taste of what the whole album's about, I think that's it.
Yeah,
you got really unorthodox fusion instruments, a guitar solo and a sax solo, and a drum one as well. You got like these syncopated hits and stabs, which kind of give the progressive fusion element to it. Loads of little motifs and embellishments in between the vocal phrases, which is kind of rocky. But yeah, really great song. Do you know what I think about some of these songs is that what I love is the cross-genre appeal of this all, because you've got soulful vibes and overall, I think each song, although it might have a different style attributed it, each one has what I would call a soulful feel to it.
Yeah.
In the terms of a relaxed. Let me tell you a quick story. I listened to this album. So we were meant to record this last week, but something came up and we had to delay it to this week. I was recording this on the day that my car went for an MOT. Sorry, I was listening to this the day my car went for an MOT. Now, personally, the day my car goes for an MOT is the most stressful day of my year, because
lots of people can relate.
Because my car, I get good cars, but I drive them a lot. You never know what can happen. So 2 years ago, my MOT was about £800, which is just unbelievable. Like, I was just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So the next year, you got PTSD from the year before. So I was listening, and I
It's a
listened to this
trauma.
album. I listened to this album when I was doing, but before I went for the MOT, and I was like, it's good. Yeah, I know, I like it in places. I like that solo is good, whatever. I went to the MOT and I didn't bother going home. I sat in the garage and listened to it. And the album calmed me down. I was there, like, so at the start, I handed him the keys. I was like, right, can I, I was quite fidgety. I was like, oh, come on, how long was it? 5 minutes already. And as the album went on, I was like, by the time I got to bloody, what's
Everything
the
is
last
going
one?
to be all
By
right.
the time I got to Josie, I was like, it is what it is. Que sera, sera. Whatever happens, so it really does. So that's what I mean by the soulful vibe. It had a calming effect on me. You listen to it, and no matter how many syncopated jabs or hits there are, which is quite progressive, it's not the same progressive as 21st Century Schizoid Man, which is in your face and loud and disruptive.
Yeah.
It's progressive in a lovely, calm way. So you've got those soulful feel through it, funky rhythms everywhere, gospel female vocals. We've already said the jazz harmonies and chords. But I love, the rock instruments and the overall how somehow if you combine all five of those elements, you've got a pop song. It's just
Exactly.
nuts.
Yeah.
It's just
How
nuts.
come? Right.
But
Yeah.
so I just wanted to say that what I loved is that you didn't have the same stylistic characteristic doing the same job on each song. And what I mean by that is Deacon Blues. The drumming to me is rock drumming.
Yeah.
But yet on Peg, as an example, it might have been funk drumming. And the same way that the guitar solo in Asia is a jazz solo, but the guitar solo in Peg is a rock solo. So I
Yeah.
love that they didn't just have rock drumming through the album, funk bass playing, jazz guitar. No, they just mixed it up.
Never the same style or never the
And
same
it keeps
musician.
it so interesting, man.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
It is. It is probably one of the most creative albums ever recorded in terms of mixing up different styles and having some sort of unit to it, which is not easy to achieve. You can have albums where each song is completely different, but there's something to it. I think it's the rhythm. There's always a bit of a funky vibe, and there's always the amazing bass. And
yeah, you're right. But you get 4 songs in, and you're kind of like, all right, I get where this album's going, and then they hit you with "Home at Last," which has like they're like, well, fuck it, let's just stick in some reggae.
Yeah, because instantly say reggae because the halftime shuffle on that one sounds like something between reggae and funk, and it's still jazzy enough. It's everything really. I actually that's my favorite song in the album. I said,
you said
Asia,
what do you love about it?
Best. I think is the moment that it comes in the story of the album for me. I think listening to an album, as we always say, is the best experience in terms of music. It's not like one song or one single. You got to listen to the album start to finish. And some songs, they just come in the perfect moment. So if you're listening to that, there's a point, at least for me, there's a point where I'm like, my God, this is so dense and it's so clever and complicated. And some of the chords are like, it's almost annoyingly good. So good that it started to annoy me by track 4. It's like, okay, right, you guys proved that you're really good, and this is like mind-blowing. And then, as I said, Home at Last comes, and I was listening to that song on my way home now because like I'm stressed. There's strikes and delays. I'll put that on my headphones because I know I'm going to be home at last. And
so this album has calmed both of us down in one situation or another.
Yeah. Plus, it's a beautiful day, and I can wear a t-shirt in London, which is.
Same here. It's lovely.
Anyway, so one thing I want to say, just one last thing, is Deacon Blues is my favorite lyrics in the album. And that's the other thing. When everyone's talking about how good people are as musicians or arrangers or etc., you forget about lyrics. On the lyrics of that song is this guy who lives a normal, boring life, and he dreams about being this super cool sax player. Okay. So, and this is a story about what he wanted his life to be like, and it's amazing, isn't it? So, because songs are mostly fake stories, isn't it? Something that you made up, and in this case, it's someone else's dream. They created this guy who is not real, and this guy has that dream, or that dream life, or that fantasy in his head, and they turn that into a song. So it's really, really clever, and it's not, none of the lyrics are heavy in any sense. None of them make you feel sad or depressed or whatever. They're all cool.
That's great point about Deacon Blues. I really enjoyed that one. The sax solo in it is brilliant. And it's much more relaxed in terms of those jazz fusion elements. It doesn't go so heavy with it. But for me, I mean, I'd have to say I agree with what you're saying, is in the sense of Asia sums up everything that is good about the album.
Yeah.
But I'd argue that Peg does it to the same extent, but in a short amount of time. And that's why I'd go for that one as my. I think I'd call that.
It's got the best riff as well.
Oh,
when the horns come in, that is just the best.
Beautiful. It's 3 minutes 57 seconds, and it gets everything in there. It gets the funk, it gets the backing vocals, it gets the jazz, it gets the rock solo. It's brilliant. But man, it's hard.
Do you know
to
why
pick.
It's called Peg?
No, tell me.
They needed a really short words to fit the melody rhythmically the way they wanted.
Yeah, it's a good Peg.
It has to be short. They would extend the letter E, make it long, but the word had to be something short so they can use it in a melodic and rhythmically way. So it's
really interesting.
Yeah, it's based on that, search for perfectionism.
In the documentary, I believe you and I have both watched, do you remember the part where the backing vocalist was saying that they'd spent hours recording lines because what you think would be a simple line, they were just like proper, specific about it in terms of, well, hold on, we don't, I can't think of a lyric, but the guy made an example, but I'll make something up. You say, I don't know, in the cool of the night, just that lyric, all right? They wanted a certain way. They wanted the emphasis on the C of cool. So you couldn't just say in the cool of the night, in the cool of, all right. And now emphasize the T on the end of night. And when you say in, we want the in to be in. We want you to swell up to in. They just had every word. They wanted something different, like a different thing. But yeah, that was a really good take. But now we're going to do the.
And the thing is, like, how good do you have to be to have the final product in your mind? Like, you have it. You have the sound in your head. If you're so demanding with people, and if you're so picky about the small details, is because you have a sound in your head that you're trying to get out of humans, trying to make them produce that sound.
Let me take you one step further and say, how awesome does it have to be, not only what you said, but for two of them to be joined in the vision that they both had for each of these songs. That's a master move. I still can't comprehend it, for both of them to be so in line with each other in knowing what they listen. No doubt there was probably some arguments, there was probably some disagreements, but for the most part, even when they're talking, even in the documentary, they get on so well. You kind of see things nowadays. When we did Fleetwood Mac and we did the classic albums documentary for that, they all had to be in different rooms because they didn't want to be near each other.
Which is very rock and roll.
But these two, I mean, man, just two peas in a pod, so to speak, as the saying goes. Anything else you want to mention, bro? Any other points?
I just want to say one thing. If I got myself thinking, why is this album part of Long Live Rock and Roll podcast?
Okay.
And I thought,
and that's the question I always ask you. What makes this album rock and roll for you?
Okay, so for me, one of my drum teachers back in the day said to me, he was a jazz player. I would say all my beginner students would learn rock first. I'll teach them rock. So why? Because rock is not a genre. It's an attitude. So you need that to be a good musician. You need a certain attitude. And I think that's what this album is for me. It's the rock attitude in a certain way, the freedom, the search for a great sound, a perfect sound, and then let chaos control after you find it.
Yeah.
And just like the attempt of producing the best music you can make with the best musicians around. So I think there is a rock attitude. The fact that you're mixing everything that comes to your head without thinking, is this like radio friendly enough? Is this going to make it? Does this work or not? So there is definitely a rock attitude to the album. And
yeah, I'd just add to that by saying that to take the various iterations of all the musicians and bands they had, but to still achieve a unified album, I thought that was masterful. But anyway, do you draw my monologue?
Oh yeah, I expect your monologue to be as good as the album.
Oh god, all right, we'll see. I've kept like the album, I've kept it short, but quality, hopefully. Here we go. So what stands out most to me about Asia, probably compared to all the other albums we've done so far, is the attention to detail given to each and every song and how intricate and fine-tuned each aspect is. Whether that's the incredibly advanced recording techniques utilized to achieve sonic perfection and fantastically nuanced sound from each instrument, or the cutthroat approach to members and session musicians, enlisting the help of over 40 different musicians and switching recording lineups day to day to ensure that the perfect group dynamic and sound was achieved. Then you add in the perfect balance between styles, each perfectly amalgamated and crafted to achieve a uniqueness from song to song, but an ultimate cohesion throughout the record. Another success of the album for me was how much the album keeps you on your toes. It's constantly mixing it up. Each song had its own journey that was in itself quite exciting, but then they'd switch up the ideas and put male BVs instead of female, or play a rock solo instead of a jazz solo. Couple this with the excellent ambience and production in each song and, and the chords, harmonies, and melodies that are constantly keeping your ears interested, meant that I was glued to the album from start to finish, sat there listening and wondering what next piece of jazz rock magic was around the corner on the next track.
Amazing.
Did it match? Did the monologue match the album quality?
Yeah, for me, yeah, man. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
8 out of 10.
One of your monologues. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
The album is 12 out of 10. Your monologue is 10 out of 10.
Is that okay?
Is that fair?
That's very fair. Thank you. Let's do one other thing that I forgot about before we end. Album cover.
Oh,
how nuts is it? Do you know what I'm going to?
I don't know the story of that cover.
No, me neither. But how I just found it incredible. Hold on, let me just for viewers. I'm going to put the album cover on instead, and I'm going to turn my camera off just so you can see it.
Yeah.
Oh wait, that didn't work. How do I? Oh well, I can do this, I believe. And that there we go. But how crazy is that, man? Because there's nothing. That's what shocks me about this is there's nothing. And when you see the other one, it's actually
how more black can he get?
Yeah, none more black.
None more black.
But look, that is the side of someone's dress and the side of their face, but it's not even the full side of the face. It's just the lips and nose. Yeah. I mean, talk about minimalistic. That is a minimalistic piece of art if I've ever seen one, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is, and it's beautiful because it's well thought when you think about the colors, and you think about the logo for the letters for Asia. You have that long J that matches the dress. When we look.
Good point. Yeah, I didn't notice that. But it's just funny because it doesn't tell you anything about the album, does it? It doesn't sort of say,
no,
oh, it's going to be kind of this, or it's heavy metal because there's a devil and flames on it, or it's whatever. It just is so ambiguous. It leaves it open to interpretation, doesn't it? You see that album and you go, what the hell is this going to be?
Yeah.
And I think like the music, actually, you're kind of treated with the similar music that comes through it, aren't you? Because you're kind of like, okay, wait, this song's different to the last one. Wait, the third song's even more different to the first song. So
yeah, there's a mystery to that cover, and there's beauty in it as well. So it's like it has a lot to do with their music in a way, but again, it doesn't tell how amazing the album is, because it's just not possible to do through an album cover, really.
Perfect. Cool. Excellent. All right, we'll leave it there then, bro. Thank you again for joining us on the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. As I say, as usual, if you're watching, please hit like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with our new episodes. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please scroll down and give us a little review. Any review you gives us flies us up the charts and gets us seen by more rock and roll fans like yourself. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who's been sharing commenting, because I read some comments on YouTube and stuff. But we've got a lot of support from you guys over the last, I don't know, 2 years. I don't know for how long we've been doing
Well,
this.
we've been doing it for almost 2 years.
Yeah, 2
coming up
years.
to 3. Yeah, I'll have to do the maths now. I think it's coming up to 3 years. But yeah, the support since we moved our podcasts to YouTube has been incredible, because I mean, it just means we're being seen by more people, and YouTube has its own podcast platform. And we have so many comments on there, and it's lovely to see everyone and engage with them and sort of share the love of music with them.
Yeah, and we're here to listen to whatever you guys have to say about stuff. And we're always doing this with passion, because we want to share music with each other, because we do that a lot. So we recommend albums to each other. That's how the show started. And we're trying to give you guys some insights on some of our favorite music. And I'm really glad you guys are enjoying and following. So yeah, thanks a lot for all the support. Keep on rocking, everyone. And don't do anything I wouldn't do.
As usual, guys, take care and long live rock and roll.